This is Patrick Donnelly, director of the Frost Place Poetry Seminar, coming to you from Western Massachusetts. I want to thank everybody involved in the poetry seminar, faculty, staff, and participants for giving their all to make the seminar a beautiful week. Thank you for coming together around our shared love and study of poetry. It's a privilege to read with Diane Seuss, who is one of my poetry heroes, as one of my person heroes. The book I'm reading from tonight is actually dedicated to her. The cover image on the book that I'm about to read from is a red velvet cloak that Franco Zeffirelli designed for the great opera singer Maria Callas to wear. 1962 production of Bellini's Norma at the Paris Opera. And the reason for that will become clear in just a second. Inside, this book is built with two intertwining sequences of poems. One sequence is mostly in the voice of my own very strange version of Jesus. Writing through this persona seemed to free me up to say some stuff that I didn't know I wanted to say. According to me, Jesus is a gardener, a Sufi, an esoteric Buddhist, an atheist, a Japanophile, a sufferer of ocular migraines, and a fan of Federico Garcia Lorca. One reading MC last year accused me of attempting a wholesale restructuring of Christianity, which isn't exactly wrong. The other sequence is, in fact, about Maria Callas, 1923 to 1977, who has fascinated me for over 50 years. For my 10th birthday in 1966, I asked for a specific recording of Verdi's Rigoletto, featuring Maria Callas, Tito Gobbi, Giuseppe Di Stefano, and conducted by Tullio Serafin. For fans of mid-century opera, this was the dream team, which I must have learned about from studying the liner notes on my mother's other opera recordings. This request frightened my father very much that I might be gay, which he was right about. You'll be happy to know that he and I reconciled around that fact, and he came to my wedding in 2005. The funny thing is that they gave me the recording. I don't know why it is that our imaginations sometimes seize on one person as an object of devotion, but if you've ever felt this, you know what I'm talking about. The genius and virtue, virtu, as Machiavelli used the word to mean excellence, honor, and power of that person, even far away in space and time, can be life-changing or even life-saving. For a gay kid growing up in New Mexico in the 1960s, it wasn't Callas's personal life, which I didn't know anything about, that was spiritually useful to me. But her strange, sad voice gave me access to my own sadness. And as I got older, her extreme otherness gave me a plausible model for my own otherness. You're going to hear in these Callas poems that I deliberately confuse her with my own dramatically troubled mother, who first took me to the opera when I was 6 years old. In the book, when Jesus introduces the topic of Callas, as one does, the Callas sequence branches off from the Jesus sequence, and then pretty absurdly, it turns around and argues with it. So I'm going to begin with the Jesus poems and then branch off into Callas when he does. Jesus said to me, "Did you mean to draw some moral from your own life? How you found love so late? How though you weren't patient, weren't kind, in pursuit were ruthless, it was given to you anyway. Though that story's not done, not proven, You have some wisdom to share with the loveless now, do you? Something they should or shouldn't do. The gay boy, the raped girl, the libeled widow. Jesus now resting his abraded hand on the book. Go ahead then, speak, promise them something. Jesus said, will someone tell me please what this pink grass is called? I see it in a field east of 116 as I'm driving south, also behind an old cemetery in Deerfield and in other waste places. It hovers about 7 inches, rosy color of wisdom in late summer. Then when in fall, dew or frost sends sparks running in and out, it's like unto gold tried in the furnace. Jesus said, I may have said this before, but consider the grass, how famous it is for what it is: nutritious, useful, twisted into ropes, woven as cloth or burned as smudge over your sometimes sick body. So many characters the grass seems to be, getting up from the fields in the morning, companions of the dew, fleeing the deep grasses of the hunting ground. Sokaku wrote, I hear the stag cry, my friend is lost. Switchgrass, bluegrass, crabgrass, knot, quaking, leaves of. You used to go into the juice shop on 23rd Street and you drank that wheatgrass as though it could save you from the cry of a lonesome retrovirus. And you did live till now, live to write that. So many stories, as many as all beings. That's how many fall in front of the mower, companions of the fire, come evening. Jesus said, a program remembers, doesn't it, where you stopped watching the movie, where you clicked off those books before shutting off the light. Other programs remember your searches, your queue, passwords, complaints, the wallpaper you chose, how loud, how bright you preferred things to be, your presence in the streaming firmament. What I want to know is, after you've climbed up the 7-story bardos, louder and brighter than you prefer, I've heard, how long do you think they'll remember your place? Hold it open for you. Keep it warm. Written on the mirror in steam, Jesus's note read, try to remember who I was before you heard my name. Jesus asked, when one looks at Japanese scroll paintings of waterfalls, taki, black ink on white silk, those unfurlings of negative space suggesting mist and falling water, supposedly so cooling in summer, how conceivably to avoid thinking the word pubic? Those jutting rocks, those overhanging tufts of grasses, humid and peaty. A poet wrote, pictures are hard to see and people are hard to love. But it's harder still to unsee how sex is every solitary thing's verge, cresting sweet mess of wet before falling. Jesus said, you will not be able to catch the swan boat of your youth by running after it like that. I know it was pretty. I know it didn't linger. I know the pier caught fire and sank. Wait, he said, tarry a while alongside the wreck. I don't say this to everyone, but there will come another swan. Jesus said, Buddhas of limitless light, a phrase encountered by accident, let's say on an old scroll or overheard. Afterward, would it be impossible to feel so doubting and blue about people? Never again so stagey, so show me, so heart hurt? Even if there are no Buddhas of limitless light? Jesus said, God without concepts. I said, but what about metaphor, simile, analogy, coyotes yipping at the moon in the water? Jesus said, God without concepts. I said, doctors without borders, dismissal without prejudice, bath time without tears. Jesus said, the Rothko Chapel, said, song without words. I said, oh, please, you just broke your own rule. And I said, instead of Rothko's empty black and purple voids, how about Vierzehnheiligen in Bavaria? Those creamy ovals, S-curves, rococo, stucco, volutes, shells, floating bows, witty, teasing, elusive architecture. Even Robert Venturi liked, look it up. Jesus said, God without, but it was late and I had already hung anyway up on him. I dreamed that Jesus bid me go and rake the ashes on Mount Golgotha, looking for the poems he lost there. My dear, don't weep, he said. One of them began, a bead like amber hung from pine. So you may, he said, find my virtue glinting in the dust. The rosin of my heart, he said. My dear, he said, my litter of lost rosin. Jesus said, just when I think I've heard everything Callas recorded, I stumble on something new. This Saint-Saëns thing, I almost didn't click on because it was, Saint-Saëns, who stormed out of the Rite of Spring, 29 May 1913, infuriated over the misuse of the bassoon. Anyhow, 61, Paris, Callas with her musical friend Georges Pret. Too bad they couldn't have married as well. They were good together. It was 3 years after her voice was supposedly gone. She gave to one listener an experience he described on YouTube. Working with my dad in the chip shop, radio on in the background, this was played. I couldn't recognize the singer, but remember saying, Dad, she has to be one of the greatest in the world. Her voice confused me. But how often do we get a chance to listen as if the first time? His first time, so close to her last time. You, writing this, Jesus said, tried to be a singer when you were young. You weren't good enough. But Callas opened a neural pathway through which the representations run, masks of light and shade. Maybe her voice had almost to be gone before it could prove with inevitable little slidings from one note to its neighbor or wider, Delilah to Samson, that her confidence was shot, but not her throat, still changing every note's color. All that has dark sounds, roots thrusting into the fertile loam, known to all of us, ignored by all of us, a power and not a behavior, a struggle and not a concept, not even in the throat, but surging up from the soles of the feet, her feet before which lay paradise. Maria Callas went to Hamburg. In 1959, when Maria Callas went to Hamburg, her hair was still neoclassical. In the film, she emerges at 0 minutes, 7 seconds, silk legs the clapper of an underwater bell. But the moment I need to tell about is at 42:30, prelude of a Pirata aria, when, resting her left hand on the conductor's cage, head down, eyes closed, cloistered, 30 seconds, 40, 50. She doesn't know us. We are nowhere and no one. Descending figure, strings, distressed, dissonant, trembling, swelling. Remember Mom in the 60s? Her door closed sometimes till noon. One of the things that really occupied me when I was writing about Callas was failure, the idea of failure, the reality of failure. Because when a person is pushing at the limits of what a human being can achieve, like an opera singer, and they overplay their hand, there can be a big crash, and that happened to her. She had both public onstage failures and private offstage failures, which were sort of public anyway. And I really was thinking about that. How do you go on after having a big on-stage public failure, assuming you don't just run off the stage and are never heard of again, which is not what she did. And then the next thought is, how do any of us go on when we have a public failure? Crack up at 1436. The trouble starts at woe to him, Lady Macbeth, letter scene, who sets uncertain foot and then retreats. On retreats, her mouth starts square, G, A, B, high C, then spreads, the C thins, curdles, acidic. But to me, it's less important that she cracks the high C. Yes, she does. She did. 1959, moment 1436. Then what her face did, her hands. Eyes widen, narrow, widen wider while she tries to save the note. After it splinters, all gone, went wrong so fast, her right hand apologizes, out from the breast, back, saying, well, I tried. I practiced for 22 years, for instance. So for a moment, 10 measures, horn, trumpet, trombone, strings, how about we shut our eyes and smile to ourselves? Then side eye to the conductor, not your fault, moving on, come on, hurry, I want to burn that cold heart of yours. Long muteness at 46:12. Then, after hiding, Callas opened her eyes and raised in profile her pointy chin, one of her mad scenes. But where's her voice? I'm just a baby in a mud house in a mountain town, so I can't help much. Maybe Mom will take me to the opera, pull on her black Dior with the plunging back, ask me to sponge Max Factor over her scars, those little white moons. At 44:06, her face had one hope. At 44:16, it flowed out through her eyes. But where's her voice? Her perfume was my sin, her 50s console full of opera from Dick Aspinwall, sometime afternoon guy who asked, did I want a knuckle sandwich? I know now that when I'm 9, I'll sing soprano. Act 1 altar boy in Tosca, Trouble in Butterfly, Marie's Kid at the end of Wozzeck on his stick horse, hop, 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 and I'll shake Stravinsky's hand. I can't help this either, but Dad might have worried less about queers in the theater and more about the afternoons he was away. At 4612, I'm still 3, so I won't hear it for another 55 years when finally, is it day or night? Am I alive or buried? She opens her mouth. Kalas versus Jesus. Jesus includes Kalas, but Kalas has no Jesus in her. It being very Greek of her to ignore him in favor of his mother and to count upon her understanding of why a woman would feel the need to say over the radio, I would not kill my enemies, but I will make them get down on their knees. I will, I can, I must. Goodbye, little table, at 2 minutes and 15 seconds. While we two were together, we only ever needed one glass to drink from, she sang. Rumors that Callas had a baby named Omero Lengrini. The earth, the dirt, it doesn't refuse any step we might make today, not more than yesterday. The space between atoms isn't more remote, lonely, angry, because some of these mornings when my foot first touches the ground, I have to cry, Mother, Mother. Tombeau at the grave of Maria Callas, an empty niche in the Columbarium Père Lachaise, Paris. She whom you seek is not here. Don't put your ear to the earth. She is not in the earth. Begotten by Apollo upon Litsa Dimitriadou, famous for a downward chromatic plunge and terrible mistakes in love. Finally, her myth was scattered over the Aegean. So if anything, put your ear to the sea. Its menses hoisted up by the moon, then let fall when that fucking rock turned its jealous, songless face away. Envoy. Callas and my mother say goodbye. 1. After whoever filched her urn from its niche in the columbarium, then sleepy, bored, set it down. I'm making up this part now. On Christmas Day, on the path of the dragon, it was Vaso decided on the Aegean. The sea being the one place where, when you put something, you always know where it is. A windy day, her ashes blew back in their faces, their mouths. 2. Following me, watching, listening, writing this. You can't save me. Out the window, I'll sleepwalk again over the rickety mill race. I'll wake up, it's in my music, again on the divan of some man not your father. And again, I'll cross the Alps on just my exhaled breath. Bruna's hand. You went to her niche in 87, stole a white rose Bruna, her maid, had left. Bruna's hand left a rose, and your hand carried it away. The primal uses of Callas. After about 1 million births, the soul recognizes the scent of placenta carried from a darkened room in a bowl, destined for a variety of ancient uses. I told Jesus when I was afraid as a child, I looked for pictures of you in the encyclopedia and circled them around my bed. Jesus said, I remember. Giotto ci mabue fra Angelico. I remember the bells as Duchos Maestà was carried into the cathedral. I told Jesus, I asked you to lift my gayness from me, lay down on my face in front of the altar at All Saints Church on West Fort Street in Detroit. I was 19. It was 1975, midnight, and the tiles were cold. Jesus said, I remember asking you, hath the rain a father, or who hath begotten the drops of dew? I told Jesus for 30 years, I asked you to send me someone to love, and then Stephen came and we married, but we were old. So I begged you, keep us alive, let us live a little longer. Jesus said, I remember the poem of you that I sent to the Empress with a branch of flowering. Thank you so much for listening.
Are we ready? Hi, everybody. I'm Di Seuss, coming to you from somewhere in Michigan. I'm so honored and excited to have gotten to hear Patrick read from little known operas finally, and to share this virtual stage with someone I dearly love and admire and respect. I want to thank everyone who has made this week work despite pandemic, hurricane, and Zoom, including Maudel Driscoll, Jake Rivers, Patrick, Donnelly, the whole staff of the Frost Place, the poetry seminar faculty and their assistants, all the students in our workshop who took the risk to bring their poems into the light, and my workshop group who have certainly taught me more than I taught them. I'll be reading poems from my forthcoming collection from Grey Wolf Press, Frank Sonnets, out in March. You'll hear a range of sonnet types, all contemporary, of course. Some a little rhymey rhyme and meter, some pretty narrative, all 14 lines because a girl's got to have standards. Well, I have to dedicate this to my sister, who I think is listening. Who wants to be soft? I don't. I've even seen a hermit crab outgrow its shell and drag its perilous softness into a doll's head. Crab, I empathize. As a kid, I fed my big baby dolls barefoot into a rotating fan blade. I wasn't mean, not at all. Inquisitive. Doll donated her toe to science. I mixed potions, iodine, nightshade, and some incongruity like a few drops of my dad's aftershave. He was dead by then, but there was a quarter of a bottle of aqua velva in the medicine chest, which I used sparingly. I wasn't planning to poison anyone, even my sister, who showed me how to harden up by folding her arms across her chest and scowling. Our mom slammed the door and drove to Lake Michigan. I pictured her making her way into the sheltering undertow. The Reverend Larry Whiteford sang "When the Gates Swing Open" at the funeral, and the three of us sat there like Mount Rushmore. Anyway, Dad was a softie. Jesus, a softie. This is a Jesus reading, Patrick. I suck so many cough drops that my pee is mentholated. Not for pleasure, for pain. I cough, it hurts. Though as a kid, if given the choice of candies, I'd pick Vicks lozenges. From there, it was boys' clothes. Wore a pack of candy cigarettes in the t-shirt pocket. Vicks in the pocket of my jeans. Had access to matches from the bowling alley. Charred the cigarette end, once set the whole pack on fire. Yes, I played with matches. No one knew or cared. That was my luck. I learned early to swallow pills so I could take knockoff one-a-day vitamins we got free from my mom's friend who worked in the pill factory. I'd suck off the sweet coating before swallowing the iron that made my little turds black. I was glad my dad was sick. It gave me access to him. I could sit next to him and hold his cold bones in my hands, trace the blue veins and the incision that wrapped his torso like a boa or a boa constrictor. I was a quiet child, but I schemed behind the silence, already setting up the terms of my survival, like chess pieces whose royalty I coveted. Black army on a stolen board. So some of you probably know the term the harrowing of hell. Quickly, it's Christ descends into limbo or hell, and then he rescues the people who are actually pretty good and brings them up to heaven. And this is the harrowing of hell if it happened in my town, my hometown. He came to us all the way down here with us. He trod the narrow path to us. He harrowed us. He robbed us of our stuff, and then he bade us to adore the very robber who had robbed us of ourselves. He swept his empty hand across our shelves. He commandeered our dust. He loosed the goats, rejoined the milky mothers to their calves. He cut our drooping fruits in halves, infringed upon our lust. He mesmerized the feral cats and charmed them from the pea-marked corners of the barn into god-awful light. He strode across our ashes and our blight, the fields we'd burned to rid ourselves of parasitic worms and ticks. He snared our seed and jarred our feeble bees. He gathered up our kids, the ones who squeezed their dirty feet into ill-begotten shoes, the brood of meth and thunderbird, whose amniotic sacs were tinted blue. He harrowed us, unbarrowed us, he sparrowed us and nailed us. Then he jacked our 7-Eleven and he hauled us up to heaven. So those who know me and my son know that he's gone through really rough struggle with addiction and Suboxone. For probably some of you know all about Suboxone, but it's a medication like methadone used to try to get heroin addicts off of heroin. And I made a boo-boo, so you'll hear it. OD'd on his Suboxone and not on purpose. Opened in the kitchen dark a bottle I thought was my own trifling med and took his drug instead. Stop signs, he called them. Helps you stop without insane withdrawal. But tells me now he just used it to deepen his high, heighten his depths. He didn't care what he took or did or what combo he imbibed, just ate up anything to make it better, deader. I had no clue what I'd done until later in bed, myself began to break into parts of equal measure like frames of film, unspliced and floating away from each other. alone, couldn't figure out how to use the phone to call for help or swallow my own spit. 3 days I sat up on the sofa for fear of disremembering to breathe if I slept. Him gone, out of his mind on dope, he tells me now, too hot for long sleeves and his arms covered in tracks so he wouldn't come home for fear I'd see. On the 3rd day, I returned to myself, though never all the way, for I had glimpsed the oblivion he sought hourly for years. Saw I'd authored him in my bones. He was my allegory, analogy, corollary, mirror. I forged his suffering, his nail, his needle, his thrill. Of course, I swallowed the stupid pill. This is from a sequence of poems in the book that are in my son's voice, and they're pretty much taken word for word from conversations we've had. So I consider them collaborations, but they're sonnets too. What do you think Elvis's best song was, he asks. For me, he said, it's that hunk of burning love song. You can tell he's sad, he says, but he's really going for it. I hate that song, I say. I find it embarrassing. I prefer the earlier stuff, Heartbreak Hotel, Jailhouse Rock, those. So you're basically saying I'm stupid, he says. No, I say, I'm saying I like those two and don't like Burning Love. You asked for my opinion. Blue Moon is better than those two, he says. And Lottie Miss Claudie from the comeback concert is better than Blue Moon. And Elvis has some great Jesus songs. His Jesus songs, I say, are so flabby. His Jesus songs are so purple. Whack, he says. On the subject of Elvis, you're whack. How about Where Could I Go But to the Lord? Have you listened to Where Could I Go But to the Lord lately? No, I say, I'm no aficionado. I am not an aficionado like you are on the subject, and I never said I was. Well, he says, I just cling to his later songs. Why do you cling, I ask. I'm saying, if you would just consider his situation and so on, he says, maybe you'd come to like Burning Love. Maybe you'd feel differently about Burning Love. On the cover of Frank, which is sort of Frank O'Hara and sort of Amy Winehouse's first album, Frank, and sort of frankness in general, is my great photo of my friend Mikkel, who died of AIDS in the mid 80s. And he's a big part of this book. Things feel partial. My love for things is partial. Mikkel, on his last legs, covered in chaos lesions, demanded that I see the beauty of a mass of chrysanthemums. Look, he demanded. I lied that I could see the beauty there, but all I saw was a smear of yellow flowers. I wanted to leave that place. I wanted to leave him to die without me. And soon that's what I did. Even the molecule I allowed myself to feel of our last goodbye made me scream. What would have happened if I'd opened my heart all the way, as I was told to do if I wanted Jesus to live inside one of its dank chambers? Whitman told me to unscrew the locks from the doors, unscrew the doors themselves from their jambs. Let love come streaming in, like when the St. Joe flooded Save-A-Lot and drove it out of business, the only store in town. Don't put my ashes in the river, Mikkel said. Put them in a tributary. I did. I put them in a tributary without touching them. Now I want to chalk my fingerprints with them, but it's too late. I want to hold them like he held me and touched my upper lip and called it Cupid's cusp. a phrase that made me wince. I felt love all the way then, and never since. I saw a little movie of a person stroking a small bird with two Q-tips, one held between the forefinger and thumb of each hand. It tipped back its head to receive the minor tenderness, which to the bird must have felt like being touched by God. For a moment, I knew what it would be to feel at the mercy of love, small scale, the kind shown but not spoken of. I was afraid to touch you. I was afraid of the lesions you described to me over the phone, their locations and their measurement in centimeters of each. Jesus marks, you called them. All so I would be prepared and unafraid, or less afraid, but still I was afraid of dying like you were dying. When I first arrived, I looked so long into your eyes, you shivered and ordered me to look away. You were imperious in your dying, yet courtly about my fear. You understood, as if I were a child afraid of lightning storms, which I am, having at age 10 been struck. Out of the blue, you said that once you were dead, I'd never be able to listen to Blue again, Joni Mitchell's Blue. Not just the song, but the whole album. It was a minor curse you lay across my shoulders, like a fur-dyed blue. And so I listen now in defiance of you. In the listening, the pronoun shifts. We are listening. There is no death. My private parts are many. My teeth are private, my tongue, the buoy of my brain bobbing in its cloistered sea. My eyes, vitreous detachment, the lightning that crackled when the membrane broke inside my eye. I was at a Kmart roving among female sanitary products, each in its private firing chamber. And a flock of crows rose in my vision and never since has found a branch to land on. The flock's voice private, my own voice box's wet, surreptitious lid opens to the jewelry box ballerina who keeps my tune whirling. And what is beneath her gauze skirt is private, and the hole in the crotch of my pants, and my memory of the blood stain on the crotch of the yoga teacher's sleek leggings, private, my viscera, as if some scalpel could penetrate me, some X-ray could make my fractures glow. My first love was not a football player who wiped my tears with his dirty sock, who grew into a fireman and fell through the roof. My first love was a phallus of cheap perfume, a small black bottle from the mall, a clandestine phallus named femme fatale. There is a force that breaks the body, inevitable. The byproduct is pain, unexceptional as a rain gauge, which has become arcane. Rhyme likewise, unless it's assonant or internal injury. Gloom, joy, which is also a dish soap, but not the one that rids seabirds of oil from wrecked tankers. That's dawn, which should change its name to dusk. Irony being the flip side of sentimentality here in the Iron Age, ironing out the kinks in despair, turning it to hairdo from hair, to do, vexing infinitive. Much better to be pain's host, body of Christ, as opposed to the Holy Ghost. When I have been suffering at times, I could step away from it by embracing it. A blues thing, a John Donne thing. divest by wrestling, then sing. The sonnet, like poverty, teaches you what you can do without. To have, as my mother says, a wish in one hand and shit in another. That was an answer to, I wish I had an Instamatic camera and a father. Wish in one hand, she said, shit in another. She still says it. When she tells me she wishes I were there to have some of her bean soup, she answers herself. Wish in one hand, she says, shit in another. Poverty, like a sonnet, is a good teacher, the kind that wraps your knuckles with a ruler, but not the kind that throws a dictionary across the room and hits you in the brain with all the words that ever were. Boxed fathers buried deep are still fathers, teacher says. Do without the, without and, without hot dogs in your baked beans. A sonnet is a mother, every word a silver dollar. Shit in one hand, she says, wish in another. And this will be my last poem. Am I rushing it? I hope not. So the Frank I mention here is Frank O'Hara. Most of you know, a poet who was one of the first sort of out there gay male poets who was unfortunately hit by a Jeep on Fire Island and at age 40 and didn't make it. But I'm very inspired by his work in this book, his diction. I hope when it happens, I have time to say, oh, so this is how it is happening. Unlike Frank, hit by a Jeep on Fire Island, but not like Dad, who knew too long, 6 goddamn years in a young man's life, so long it made a sweet guy sarcastic. I want enough time to say, oh, so this is how I'll go, and smirk at that last rhyme. I rhymed at times because I wanted to make something pretty, especially for Mikkel, who liked pretty things, soft and small things, who cried into a white towel when I hurt myself. When it happens, I don't want to be afraid. I want to be curious. Was Mikkel curious? I'm afraid by then he was only sad. He had no money left, was living on green oranges, had kissed all his friends goodbye. I kissed lips that kissed Frank's lips, though not for me a willing kiss. I willingly kissed lips that kissed Howard's deathbed lips. I happily kissed lips that kissed Basquiat's lips. I know a man who said he kissed lips that kissed lips that kissed lips that kissed lips that kissed Whitman's lips. Who will say of me I kissed her? Who will say of me I kissed someone who kissed her? Or I kissed someone who kissed someone who kissed someone who kissed her? Thank you.